Okay, away we go. This is the process by which you can weed and pre-mask something that is way too damn big for your table. First things first is we want to re-spool this so that it is going through the right order. You always want to start at the far right end of any bit of text to the far left end. Interestingly enough, for numbers you do just the opposite. And it's because of where the openings are on letters versus numbers. On letters they tend to be on the right hand side, whereas with numbers they tend to be on the left hand side. So first of all, you want to control the outspooling of your vinyl. Find a good stopping place, cut through the vinyl but not the backing, and begin to weed. One of the most difficult things about weeding something on this scale, of course, is keeping control of the vinyl that you're weeding out so that it doesn't come back into contact with the rest of your vinyl. Because if it does that, you've just ruined an entire cut. And that is bad. This is our kind of a worst case for letters because they've got the openings in both directions, so you can't even go backwards on them. It's usually okay to just let these sorts of things happen and pull them out after the fact. I also recommend, as you go, to pull out the inside pieces because it's really easy to forget. And it's an extra bunch of re-spooling and unspooling that you have to do in order to come back and get them later. So pull those out early. Then, obviously, you want to control the spool on this end as well. And especially when you got a font with these sharp points. Those tiny little sharp points, they catch on everything. And before you know it, you've completely screwed up an entire plot. By ripping out a letter that needed to stay there. So do it again, come down here, find your endpoint, cut it out, and continue to weed. Getting familiar with your font makes it a lot easier to do this weeding because you know the intricacies of it, you know what it's going to do when you're weeding it. Like for instance, in this font, the inner piece of the R is connected to the open piece below it. So rather than ripping it out, you can, as I'm doing here, weed it out as you go. Tend to twist these down pretty tight just so they take up very little space and are less likely to accidentally stick to something you're working on before you have the chance to toss it in the garbage. Now a lot of people keep a garbage can nearby and that works perfectly well. I just don't have that kind of space. And this is all about working in limited space. So away we go, we continue to weed. W's are easy. You don't even have to worry about whether or not you're going slow. At least these W's in this font at this scale. Scale is everything. Tiny fonts, it's a completely different set of skill sets compared to something on this scale. Fortunately, the walls of these letters, the strokes of these letters are nice and thick, so I'm not worrying about it trying to pick up prematurely. Okay, now you got it weeded. Now it's time to pre-mask. I always try and conserve what I can, so I trim off the excess here, start my pre-mask very close to the edge. Make sure I got it straight on the table by basically lining it up against the edge. That way I know that it's weeding, or rather, that it's pre-masking straight. Because then all I do, once I have this anchored at the edge of the table, all I have to make sure of then is that my roll is perpendicular to this by being parallel to this. That way I know I'm going to get a nice straight, even pre-mask all the way down the line. Knowing the lengths of your arms is critical because you're going to do some stretching. Because you're going to be holding on to your roll down here and pre-masking with your primary arm back here. Now if you're left-handed, obviously this is a little bit different, probably a little bit easier. You can probably get a much longer stretch if you're left-handed. I'm right-handed. I'm most comfortable using my right hand for this sort of thing, so I have to stretch a little more. Now this part is critical. You want to make sure that your base material is taut, and you do that by putting your fingers down on top of a piece of actual vinyl on your roll and pulling it taut. That way you know that it's not going to rise up and catch prematurely to your pre-mask. This also helps you make sure that your pre-mask roll is set down in the right place to keep it from starting to buckle partway through. Alright, the next part is basically roll your roll over here, let it sit here nice and straight, nice and free. Free up the edge of your print here by removing the excess bit of pre-mask. And carefully lift, pull it towards you. Keep doing that until you're in position. Now, once you're in position, you need to make sure that this isn't going to move on you. So you take your strip of medium to high-tech pre-mask, lay it across, and let that anchor that sucker down. I usually keep an angled piece as well, a little bit wider, just to make sure that this is not going to move on me. Once it's in place, and your confidence locked down, you want to slowly start drawing it out again, because you don't want to tear that free, because if you do, you're in kind of a world of hurt. Because then you have to go through and you have to fix it, and it's so many things can go wrong at that point. Once again, you do your stretch. Make sure your roll is positioned correctly. You can usually see when it wants to start to buckle. It's at that moment that you want to immediately stop, adjust the position of your roll, pull your material taut again, and then keep going. As you see, I'm doing the standard technique of starting in the middle, pushing out, pulling out, pushing out, pulling out. And just keep doing that until I get to a stopping place, usually the end of a letter. Because one thing you do want to avoid is stopping in the middle of a letter, because when you go back to it, you're very likely to have a wrinkle down the center of it. Then you got bubbles in your vinyl once it's finally installed, and you don't want that. So to avoid that, make your stopping places between graphic elements. Here's the thing. This will want to curl up on you. So just tack it down. Alright. So keep drawing it out. Again, being careful, going slowly. Once you're used to what a particular print does, you know how many draws it takes. And this one in particular takes 3 draws across my table. And you finish her out. Got a technique for the end too, so keep watching. One thing to keep in mind is as this roll diminishes, the more likely it's going to want to touch the vinyl prematurely because it's not as fat. This is not raised up as high. So that's something to keep an eye on, and be aware that as your roll gets smaller, the chance of prematurely catching your vinyl increases. You want to be extra careful about making sure your roll is positioned correctly and your vinyl is pulled taut. Now, for the end, rather than pre-masking all the way down to the end, with 15-inch vinyl especially, what you have an issue with is once you're no longer putting pressure on the end of your material, it's going to want to try and move with your squeegee. The way I avoid that, I get nice and close to the end, pull it out, just a single stripe down the center, and then this just smooths right out. Real easy. You cut it free. And you're done. That is a perfect pre-mask of a, in this particular case, 24-foot long material. Easy peasy.